All right. Just a reminder to please mute your microphones if you haven't already done so. This webinar will be recorded, so we will hopefully get that up and posted for those that can't join us at this present moment. Go ahead. All right. As Claire said, my name is... Oh, I need to share my screen, sorry. All right. Okay, share my screen. Hi, so my name is Kevin Wykovich. I am a full-stack developer here at Hubzero. Today we're going to talk about the external contribution process and kind of how you introduce your changes if you have a supported hub or if you want to make an open source contribution to our core distribution. So I guess the name of the title of this presentation was the Hubzero Git Flow, or as I really wanted to call it, Git with the Flow Man. Just a little funny humor there. So today, looking to talk to those that are Hubzero core developers that want to contribute to the open source core distribution, to those that have custom extensions or want to contribute to a hub that Hubzero hosts, or external developers, anyone that, and anyone in between, that you might be running your own hub and want to know how to submit your fixes into our core. So hopefully you walk away with an understanding of how the repository is structured. You'll kind of understand how we do our monthly release cycle. And it kind of plays into, kind of how we do our versioning and kind of the window to accept these changes. And then, kind of just refresh on some Git fundamentals. So the biggest thing that, the most fundamental thing to Git and GitHub by extension is the concept of a branch. So basically, right, a branch is a running history of changes of code. Currently, we are set up in this fashion. We have a 2.10 branch, which really should have been the 2.1 branch, but we kind of made that decision a little late in the game. You'll kind of see a graphic in the next couple slides that kind of makes sense of that, and how we kind of do our branching and versioning. Right now we are pushing out 2.1 releases, so here in a couple days, March 1st, Wednesday, we will be pushing our 2.14 release. And again, so we try not to do any major development on our stable branches. We try to keep that to bug fixes and critical things that our customers need. And where we do kind of the major work is in our 2 branch, which is called master. And master is kind of our, it's not tested yet. It's where we kind of do the major work, our breaking changes. And at any point that would be, we could pull that off and start testing, and that would become our 2.2 release. So the graphic that I was mentioning, so this is our 2.10 branch here, and at the first Wednesday of every month we make a versioned branch. So if you go to GitHub today, you'll see that there's a 2.10 branch, and from that we make versions. And we're always cherry picking hot fixes to that production branch. So what you see on, I think we're currently on 2.13, you'll see a couple hot fixes that are actually cherry picked onto that branch after we actually branched from the 2.10 release. So our monthly release cycle kind of looks like this, and it's not so exact. Because there's might be a couple more weeks the way the days fall, but we always release the first Wednesday of every month. And after that, internally we do some cleanup on our tickets, And then we set a priority for tickets that have yet to been worked. And we, try our hardest to get everything done, but there's only so much time in a month. And as you can see, at the end of the month, we want to allow some ample time for bug fixing and testing of changes we made during the 2 weeks of development. So I guess the takeaway from this slide is we have 2, maybe 3 weeks of development before we start our QA and testing phase. So last Friday, we put out release candidate number 1. And we put that out on our QA hubs to be tested by the hub team and those that have third party external contributions to test their stuff alongside our core changes. And then this week, currently, we're in the middle of QA testing, and the community managers have done a great job in letting us know that, hey, this ticket's still not fixed. Maybe you've introduced another issue or found another problem during this time. So, that's kind of what we do up until our target release date. I'm going to start talking about hosted hubs. So those that have a Hubzero supported hub, we ask that you do your development in the app directory. And why is that? So the structure of the CMS has kind of 2 main directories that you need to be aware of. The first one is the app directory, and that's where we want hub-specific code to live. So things that go in the app directory. Custom extensions, so components, plugins, modules, and even migrations can go there. Each hub's individual template, if you are a template designer and want to have your own template that sets your brand apart, you would put it in this template directory. Configuration is in the app directory, so your database configuration, global settings, and other services that you might need are the configuration is in the app directory. And then uploads are generally speaking in the app directory through the app site directory. So if you attach a image to a collection or a wiki page or upload something to a support ticket, those files actually live in the app directory. And the reason we do that is that at any time we would like the ability to change what's in core and not have it disrupt what your hub is doing, right? So things that are in the core directory are shared libraries. We use Composer to load in libraries that provide extended functionality, such as in our projects component, project files. We have several adapters that draw from code that's maintained by other developers. So we pull that in using PHP's package manager and vendor. And then the standard distribution of our extensions. So these are the same extensions that are across all hubs. And the default templates, those also live in the core directory. So even as a thought experiment, if you have your own development hub, you could take a component from the core and move it to the app directory. And we have it set up in a way that it will override, the app directory takes precedent over what's in the core. So you can maintain your own version of any one of our components, plugins, or modules. So in our supported hub configuration, we have a couple of different flavors of how we handle code and how it ends up from development to production. This is for hubs that have a dev host and a production host. I'll show you what the other configuration is here in a second, but consider this for a second. We have a bare repository that we merge in the Hubzero core code in with your app directory. And this practice stems from the days that we didn't have the separation of the app directory or the core directory, and everything lived in the same directory structure. So if you wanted something custom, we did the changes right there. And as you can probably imagine, that's not really maintainable. If we did change something in core, we might have broken something that existed, as a customization on another hub. This mechanism is still in place today, but because we can separate out customizations from standardized code, it's been a little easier. So what I do when I run an update is I take the 213, I took the 213 branch last month, and I merged it into a master branch, and each hub has their own bare repository. So I merged it in, let's say, per.edu, per.purdue.edu. I merged in our Hubzero CMS repository with a master branch on their hub. And what happens then is it automatically is pulled to dev.per.purdue.edu. And if one of their developers did a change in the app directory, it gets pushed back to the bare repository. And when we go to roll out changes on production, we simply do a git pull to production. So we never go the opposite direction. We never go production all the way back down to dev. There is this bare repo that sits in the middle, and we just simply pull straight up. The other configuration that we have right now is we put a stage host in the middle of dev and production. It's the same thing that happens. We merge in the core with the bare repository, and it actually automatically merges with the clone of the bare repository. But from your perspective, if you were doing development in one of our hosted development environments, you could pull down, the changes that from the core and make dev look like stage, and then you could do your changes on dev and push them back onto stage. And then when the update needs to be pushed to production, we do a pull here. So it's just a different flavor. There's a lot of moving pieces. I can say that we're doing some work to simplify this process. So for today, like I said, it was a little involved, and here's some of the steps that you would do to make your changes. So you're making changes in the app directory. Let's say you have modified a component to have a specific functionality that your hub needs. So you would want to sync your dev machine to what stage and production look like by doing a git pull. You would then make your code changes. You would test them on your dev host. And then you would commit the changes as you would normally. And then if you have a stage machine, if you're on the dev host right now, if you have a stage machine in that mix, you would do a git push so your changes would go to stage. If you have a dev environment, that's not necessary. In just dev and production, that's not necessary. So you could skip right to step number 7. Otherwise, you might want to test it on stage. And usually the way we operate stage is that it more closely mirrors production. We try to periodically go through and refresh some of the uploaded content to mimic what's on production. So it might be a good idea to test there. In either case, once your changes are ready to be pulled to production, you would submit a ticket on your hub asking for the code to be promoted to production. So generally, normal operation would be that we would do this on the next release cycle, unless there's a business case that it's a critical change. This becomes really difficult to kind of make sure that the changes go through when we freeze the code for release candidate number 1. Well, why is that? And if we go back, and using this as an example, what happens when I create the release candidate is that I do a merge. And the only way to get code onto production, right, would be to pull to production, right? But when I do that merge, right, we have release candidate code sitting waiting to be pulled. So there's no way that I currently have a method of separating out your changes that you made on dev that you're asking to be promoted to production from the release candidate. So that's something to be mindful of. So to solve this problem, I've introduced a new model, and we'll communicate this out when we are set up to do that. Currently, Hubzero.org is running this model, where the app directory is its own repository from the core directory. We offer private repositories on GitLab.hubzero.org that contain all of your customized code. And all that would happen is when you wanted that to be updated, you could go through the GitLab merge request system and ask a Hubzero developer to review that code. And once it's approved, it would get pulled onto production. And then we could update core at any point in time. And I guess you have two moving pieces. So your changes don't get in the way of our changes and vice versa. I think it's worked out pretty well on Hubzero.org. For instance, Hubzero.org is already running release candidate number 2, containing some bug fixes, so we're kind of dogfooding there. But it didn't really get in the way of anything else, and I'm able to do that pretty frequently. So this is if you want to contribute something to the core distribution. So if you want to make an open source contribution that gets put on all hubs and that gets packaged with our Debian and Red Hat distributions, this is how you would do that. So this is what we're going to talk about now. So again, this is anything that's affecting things in the core directory. To do this, you need a couple of things. You need an account on github.com. You need a development environment. And we would really like that you have your own development environment. We have Amazon Web Service instances that you can spin up through the Amazon Marketplace. We have a Vagrant Box offering, which is it loads via VirtualBox on the back end, but it allows you to edit code locally, and it does some things with file sharing between the VM. So it gives you an environment to kind of test your code in. We do have the VMware download available on hubzero.org/downloads. Or you can build your own hub from packages, which is labor intensive, but you kind of have more control over what features you have enabled or disabled. You need the utility Git, and if you're on a Linux system, you could use yum or apt-get, aptitude to install that, or if you're on Mac OS, you can use brew to install that. And then another utility that I'll show you that I like to use, it's a visualizer for the Git tree, is called TIG. It's Git spelled backwards. A little Unix humor there. But it allows you to kind of see what state your repository is in, and I find it very helpful. So if you want to make a core contribution, and I'll show you here in a second, kind of do a live tutorial of what that would look like. You're going to need to fork the Hubzero CMS repository. And then you're going to clone that fork onto your development environment. We're going to add an upstream branch, which allows you to receive changes that we're making. Sean has a reputation for sneaking in changes every second. So you'll want to make sure that you have his changes in to make sure that you're not conflicting with other changes that came down. You'll need to update your local branch. Always keep it fresh and up to date. I like to make feature branches. This helps me separate out different projects or little groups of functionality, and I'll show you how that would work. And it really makes the pull request system pretty simple. You're going to make your code changes and keep your feature branch up to date. You're going to push to your fork and submit a pull request. Once your pull request is accepted, you're going to want to update your local branch to reflect that. So I'll show all of these. I know it's a little daunting. I'll show these all in kind of a little demo here that we'll do. If you also want to make a framework change, it's the same kind of process. I guess another caveat would be this is just one flow. Everyone can, I guess, experiment their own way with how they utilize Git to make their changes. It's not necessarily set in stone, and sometimes it doesn't work for everyone. But if you find another way that's comfortable for you, you're more than welcome to do that. As long as we get a pull request that's formatted in the way that would make it easy for us to merge the code in, that's what we're looking for. I'll touch on that in a second. I have another document that outlines exactly all of these steps and what we're looking for. So, simplified, this is what happens. You're going to go clone the official Hubzero repository to your GitHub account. And that's called forking the repository. And then you're going to want to basically install that code onto your development environment using Git Clone. In order to get the latest changes, we'll need to add changes from upstream. So you'll be pulling down changes from the official Hubzero repository. You'll make your changes, and you're going to want to push them back to your GitHub account. And then you're going to submit a pull request. And what that pull request does is it does a difference between the code on Hubzero and your forked repository. I think that's a little out of order. So let's see what this looks like in action. Let's see here. If I close this guy. So this is my GitHub account. And what I've done is I've forked the Hubzero repository. And so how you would do that, you would go to github.com, Hubzero CMS, and you click this fork button. Since I already have it, it kind of, is like, well, what are you trying to do? But I already have one, so what would show here is, I think, your account. It would show like your picture. You click that, and it takes you to a screen that says that you forked the repository. So if I go to my GitHub account, you'll see that I have a copy of that. We'll switch to the 210 branch. So if you wanted to make a change, for instance, that you wanted in for 215, our April release, you would do it here on 210. You can see some bits of information here that my repository is forked from the Hubzero CMS repository, and that I'm 12 commits behind Hubzero 210. So it looks like I do need to update my repository. So let's take a look and see what that would entail. Let's switch over here to my terminal view. Oops. What I'm going to do is go to my development environment. I have a hub on Amazon. Let's see here. Bear with me for a second. I have to copy my key or set a password. let's see. Okay. Yeah, we'll just do our backup plan here. Bear with me. Remote remove. Origin. Remote. Origin. So basically what I'm doing in the long way is I'm cloning my repository on GitHub. Yeah, you'll see all the changes there. And let me just kind of show you that we're in the same place here. So how did you clone that? There's this button here that says clone or download. If you have an SSH key set up, which I highly recommend, otherwise you have to use your password, username and password every time with HTTPS. I'd recommend using SSH, so you don't have to, you can just use your key, but you could use HTTPS. So that's what I did. I did a git clone of that URL. Perfect. And just kind of want to show you, I think I can do a brew install TIG. I don't have brew installed on here. Sorry, I tried to get WebEx running on my workstation, but I'm running Linux on there, so it's a little funky. Just to show you that where I'm at, I am tracking the master branch. And I can see that Sean's been making changes all day today. So I want to make a change to 2.10 because I want to contribute something to the 2.15 release, for instance. Again, 2.10 is kind of a misnomer. It should be 2.1. But, you know, it's something that we got to live with until the next version. So the first thing I want to do is make sure I'm up to date. So I'm going to do a git pull. Well, first we need to add upstream. I'm sorry. Git remote add upstream, and all we need to do is give it github.com hubzero-cms. And I'm going to give it a git fetch all, so it gets all of the history from all of the remotes. So what is a remote? It's a remote repository, so I have two of them. I have Origin, which is my fork of the repository, and I have Hubzero CMS. Now what I have to do is make my local branch and equal to upstream. So I'm going to do a git pull dash rebase upstream 2.10. Now, why did I give it a rebase? We keep our history flat, so we don't show merges. This is just a practice that the Hubzero development team has done throughout our history, so don't want to break from tradition, so we're just going to do that. And what it's going to do is pulled out all the changes from Hubzero CMS, and put my changes on top. So I'll do git status. And you'll see that now my branch is ahead of Origin 2.10 by 12 commits. So what does that mean? That means that, again, if I show you my remotes, Origin is my fork of the Hubzero repository, right? It doesn't know that Sean's made 12 changes since I've last updated. So I want to make my fork equal to what Hubzero has. So I'm going to do a git push origin 210. And this is the part that if you use your SSH key, it goes a little bit quicker, so you don't have to type in your username and password. Okay, so I should be even, and I can go back to my GitHub account, and if I hit refresh, I can see that I am even. All right, so let's make a change to core. So let's change something with that doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of consequences. Let's change something in the README, and we'll just kind of put something in the end, and we'll say testing, making a core contribution. Perfect. I can do a git diff to see the change that I made. It shows that I've added a core contribution. And now I need to make a commit. So I'm gonna say git add readme. If I do a git status, it will show that I have changes that are now ready to be committed. I'm gonna do a git commit -m. I'm gonna tag it with core in this case. If I were to modify, let's say, the blog component, I might put blog and then a message saying that a descriptive message of the changes I've made. Since this doesn't really fit with a component and is more just part of the core distribution, I'm going to keep it with core, and I'm going to say making a test contribution. Perfect. I think it's going to think that I'm Claire since I stole her laptop, but that's okay. So git status. So now my branch is ahead of my remote by one commit. So I'm going to go ahead and push that to my fork. I could try to push that to Hubzero, but I'm going to get an access denied because I don't have pull or push access to Hubzero. Only Hubzero employees have access to do that. Otherwise, you have to submit a pull request. So, how to submit a pull request? Go back to my repository. It shows that I am one commit ahead of Hubzero 210. I'm going to compare and make a pull request. What you'll want to do is make sure that the base fork is Hubzero CMS and that you have the right branch set up. And you're going to compare that against your fork. So it pulls in a bunch of information for me, and it shows that I've made one commit, and that it shows that I've made my changes. So I'm going to create a pull request. And a couple things are going to happen. Number one is that Travis is going to run. So Travis is our continuous integration pipeline that we're in the process of developing. And it's going to run some checks to make sure that the code is safe and sound. So you can check in on that by clicking on it. And what it does is it builds a container and it clones the repository, and it'll run some checks. It takes about 6 minutes to run, but we cannot accept pull requests that fail this. So what gets ran here are our standards, and I guess I'll show you. We do have this documented in our documentation. So if you go to hubzero.org, documentation, I keep hitting enter a little early today. I do apologize. If you go to web developers, and the contribution guide. Scroll down. It should be, right here. It runs PHP CS, or which stands for PHP Code Sniffer. And these are rules that we formed to make our code more readable and more maintainable. So the instructions for setting that up locally, so you can do this before you contribute and have a greater chance of a successful pull request on the first time by checking this out. It just runs this command. We do exclude some views and template files and JavaScript code and stuff in unit tests. But our main code base is scanned. So that's getting right here. We pull on the composer updates, and it will tell you line by line if there's any errors. At this point, one of the Hubzero team members, core contributors, will get an email saying a new pull request has been opened, and to take some time to review it. And more than likely, we will work with you to kind of get the code where it needs to be. I mean, we might have some questions, but we'll basically work with you to accept your changes, make them awesome, and get them merged in. So that's just a brief overview of how you would do go through our Git cycle. Again, these slides will be available, and then also on this contribution page is step-by-step exactly what you need to do to make sure that your dev environment and that your Git repository are up to date. Alrighty. So I guess a little bit of a wrap up. I kind of showed you the organization of how the Hubzero CMS is put together. I hope that I communicated how the hosted hub environment might play a factor in how we accept your contributions, and how the release cycle might interplay with that. How to make your changes. So if you wanted to do where to put your code, if you want to do customizations on a hub, any hub really. I have down here hosted environment, but this applies to any hub that you can't assume that the changes in core will be permanent. So we give you an area that you can make these changes, and if a core change comes through and breaks it, we have greater isolation of the code. Showed you how to kind of do a pull request on GitHub. Showed you kind of about the release cycle, and I gave you a preview of what the work I'm doing right now to separate out the app and core directories in the CMS. Alrighty. I have some documentation here. If you need help doing some of the GitHub basics, this tutorial here that I found has, I guess we could take a look at it, but it has almost every scenario that you could ever imagine going through with Git. So if you have, any questions, maybe give this a quick skim. It kind of tells you all about the different features of Git and where to go for that. The Git book is, written by the Git maintainers, and goes through all kinds of different, Git topics as well. And then a link to our documentation about, how to do contributions. And I prepared just a little quick cheat sheet. Again, feel free to take a look at it. I kind of make some notes for, Hubzero specific operations. So at this point, I guess we can open the floor for some questions. I think Eric is taking chat messages. Go ahead here and stop sharing my screen.
Okay, Okay, so we had one question. Let's say I have my own VM set up, and I've been building a component in there. That is not immediately set up to download code from GitHub, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just want to play that with the group.
So I guess to answer your question, and then I can share my screen here again. If you do go to the Hubzero documentation, okay, you should see my screen again. The Hubzero documentation. If you scroll up, I walk you through at least how to do it on a AWS instance, but the same practice applies for the Vagrant Box, which has documentation on how to do it. If you go to the Vagrant Box on github.com, Hubzero-vagrant, I actually do that for you. If you run these commands, you will have a hub up and running for you. But what the secret sauce of that is the provisioning script. It goes through and it clones the repository for you and puts the code in the right place. It runs Composer and it runs migrations. So the same thing applies. It's the same instructions are just kind of adapted for the AWS instance. The same applies for if you download the Debian VMware image that is on our downloads page. So I hope that should get you started.
Great. So if I've been using the 2.1.3 instead of the 2.1.0 as the branch, will that cause any issues?
So in I guess issues, what kind of issues are we looking for? If you're using the 2.1.3 branch, all you would need to do to upgrade your hub would be to check out the soon-to-come 2.1.4 branch and fix permissions. Aside from that, if you were making changes and commits on 2.1.3, you can cherry pick those commits back to 2.1.0 and push those back in the main line. Does that maybe answer that question?
Possibly. Maybe just clarification, the 2.1.3 branch is newer than 2.1.0.
Not necessarily. So 2.1.3 is a snapshot of 2.1.0 at, I guess it would have been the top of this month, right, of February. So on the first Wednesday of February, the 2.1.3 branch was created from the 2.1.0 branch. The 2.1.0 branch always continues to get the newest changes, and essentially the point releases are just snapshots of the 2.1.0 branch in time.
Great. So let's say I am a part of a group that has a hosted hub, and I have my own VM that I'm developing on. How do I get my shiny new component onto the stage machine? What's the process for doing that?
Okay, so I have my own VM on my laptop, right? And I want to make those changes, get them on production eventually, but I want to put them on stage. What I would do, if you have a hosted hub, what you could do, and if more than likely you're a developer, so we'll just take Per for example. Oh, I need to share my screen. Sorry. Automatically think that I'm sharing screens. Okay, so I'm going to log into Per, for instance. dev.per. dev.per.purdue.edu. What I can do is go to their directory, and I can actually clone this. So we're in the dev directory. I can actually go, to my development box. Let's say this is my development box. I can do a git clone my username dev.purdue.edu the directory, and it will actually pull down the code from there. I can then push my code from my development box to dev.pur, for instance. So that's one way that you can do it. Personally, when I'm doing development and want to get changes into an app directory on another hub, I just simply copy it over using maybe a utility like scopy or maybe sftp.
Great. To back up to the previous question, an additional one there. So is going back to the 2.1.0 branch okay if you're already on 2.1.3?
Yes, and you'll want to make sure that you pull from upstream or wherever you may be to get the latest changes. So 2.1.0 is the development branch. And then we take snapshots, right? The 2.1.3 branch, for instance, to at least have an idea of where our production hosts are currently sitting. And if we need to deploy a hotfix or a change that's critical, maybe it's a security issue, all we have to do is cherry pick a commit from 2.1.0, our development branch, onto 2.1.3 and tell the production host to do that merge process again. And so that's an automated thing now.
Great. Are there any special handling of supergroup components?
Supergroup components are a little different in that they're not core components. In the proposed model, they might be moved to maybe the general app directory structure. But we also have a mechanism for integrating GitLab for supergroups themselves. And that's outlined in our documentation as well. I guess, do we want to post a link to that? I don't exactly know where it's at. I think it's web developers. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's web developers documentation. Look for supergroups and supergroups in GitLab.
You copy and paste it, but in the chat.
Yeah, I'll copy and paste this. And, so I guess information for that would be found here. All right.
So is GitLab /app? So using GitLab /app is enough for that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Jack, can you clarify a little bit, please? Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I've already moved my app stuff over to GitLab, separate from the GitHub repository, which I think you recommended. But everything is in there, not just the development stuff, all the local settings and everything. And so they use the git ignore to skip most of those directories, but it includes the supergroup components. And I didn't know quite how to handle that without getting things messed up.
If you followed the documentation, each supergroup should have its own repository. So what that allows you to do is manage each group's components kind of on a finer granularity.
So not just one repo for the whole app, but one for each supergroup as well.
Correct. And if you set it up in the way that the documentation is written, when you change that group from a regular group to a super group, it will create a new project under the GitLab group. So, for instance, we have a Hubzero group on GitLab, and any group that we have the API set up. So you put your API key in there, and when you turn that regular group into a super group, it creates its own repository. There's a little bit of manual setup that you need to do to kind of sync those changes. But it seems to work out pretty well for several of our production hosts.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit in Slack, but I was trying to do it after the fact, and I got my API key and all that, but it's still not quite where I want it to be. So I almost have to start over, I think.
You should be able to, if you go into the back end, and I don't know if the repository is initialized, I don't know the state, but if you toggle it from a regular group to a super group, it should recreate that project in GitLab and sync everything for the first time.
Right, that's what I was trying, and I think that's where I got hung.
Okay.
I can take this offline.
Yeah.
Take up time.
No worries.
All right, so we might accept a few more questions. We're about out of time, and if you want to throw any additional ones Eric's way, just while everyone's thinking or typing, want to do a quick shout out to our next tutorial that will be for March. This tutorial will be focused on building menus and article page structures. So just walking through the process of connecting menus and article pages. It's helpful if you're starting up a new hub, or if you never really set up your menu or have questions about how that process is laid out. Please join us in March, and you'll be able to go to Hubzero events to find more information there. But Eric, if you have any further questions from the group.
I do not.
Alrighty. I guess one other thing that I'll plug while I'm here is the Hubzero contributors Slack channel. It's kind of an informal meeting place for those that might be hub owners or might be writing code for a Hubzero platform to kind of discuss things. It's one of those things that falls. It's not quite a ticket, not quite a email. We've had people help. Not Hubzero employees help each other out, and it's been kind of nice to see a community growing. So I do want to plug that. If you have a at Purdue.edu account, I think it's hubzerocontributors.slack.com. If you go there with your Purdue.edu, you can join. If you would like to, if you don't have a Purdue.edu, go ahead and send me an email at kevinw@purdue.edu. I'll be happy to add you. There, I'd like to try to announce, when we're doing these releases and if we have any hiccups along the way. Mostly development related stuff. And are we going to post the slides and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. After the meeting, once we get everything wrapped up, you should see a few new resources be built on Hubzero, and we will publish the tutorial on YouTube as well for our channel. I'll be sure to send out information on our social media channels, which is Hubzero platform, both on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. We will post the links there and also add any additional information into our documentation if it's not there already. So keep an eye out, be more informed, continue developing and contributing. That's the key thing. But we appreciate everyone taking an hour this afternoon to listen, and we hope to see some pull requests here soon.
All right. See you later.
Thanks, everyone.